I'm always very grateful. Thank you. We're always very grateful to you guys for being here, for making the time to make the workplace safer to everyone, for employees, for your fellow workers, administrators, and all the people that you are assigning to safety activities or safety duties, and you want them to learn all of these things. My information is on the screen. We're doing this monthly series, the first Friday of every month. And what I want to do is just kind of give you briefly, if I see something new up there that OSHA has for us, just kind of bring it to your attention. And in this case, we do have a little bit of an update with COVID-19. So I'll spend a minute or two with that, and then I'll dive into the fire prevention, the Cal OSHA requirements that will get you on fire. So the session is being recorded, but I do want you to participate. So if you don't want to unmute your mic and put your wonderful face for all of us to share and see, just make sure that you help us by chatting with us, and you answer the questions that we may put to you, and that you give us some of your input, right? So remember, these sessions are in order to facilitate information to you. Your situation in your facility may be different, and you may require further information, or you can contact us via email if you have questions after this session took place. We will send the materials. I will send the slides. I always send them. If I don't send them before, I send them after, and all of the links that I talk about. So I want to talk about some of the most common mistakes we make in our organizations or places of employment regarding our fire prevention program. Some of us don't even have one. We believe that because we have an emergency action plan and we tackle the issue of fire within our emergency action plan, that's more than enough. But you will discover that the fire prevention program has specific requirements under the OSHA federal laws and the Cal OSHA California laws. I want also to discuss the elements of a compliant fire prevention program, because there are some elements that are mandated. We're going to talk about that. I want to talk about 3 of the most important elements for that fire prevention, and make emphasis on how to train your employees. We want to make sure that if there is actually a fire in the workplace, your employees know how to respond to it. That's key. That's actually the entire purpose and goal of having an emergency action plan and a fire prevention program, to be able to respond to those emergencies. We don't want our employees to be left wondering where the emergency equipment is, how to activate it, how to get out of the building, right? Or at the very moment, how to shut off equipment. We don't want that to be the last thing that it's on their mind at the moment of the emergency, because then it'll be chaos. Determine if hands-on training for portable fire extinguishers is required for California organizations and employers. That's a quick question, a quick answer for you. But the first thing that I want to show is that in December 2022, the actual emergency temporary standard became an actual permanent standard, where it was adopted, and we are going to leave. There are no changes for what the May 6th regulation showed. So that's a quick update. You can read all about it. But one of the things that is very key for you guys to know about with the COVID-19 is the actual isolation and quarantine requirements, truly, because the isolation and quarantine requirements give you great guidance as what to do if someone has symptoms. What if someone calls you and says, I have a positive COVID test, but I'm most of the time away from people at the workplace. Can I come back? What should you respond? How can you respond? And if you haven't read the employer guidance for isolation and quarantine for COVID-19 that are updated to the California Department of Public Health, you should let us know. So here we go. Why fire prevention? Here are some of the statistics. According to OSHA, workplace fires and explosions happen in the workplace. They kill 200 and injure more than 5,000 workers each year. So that's a lot of people that get injured. That's a lot of people that die at the workplace. They cost your business more than 2.3 billion in property damage. So even if you don't have employees that are hurt, property damage of up to 2.3 billion in our nation is a lot to be paying and looking at the aftermath and trying to replace and trying to get back to business with something like this and damages. It's not good. So the National Safety Council has great training programs. You have to be a member, you have to pay, but it's a really easy way of becoming a member. And if you're a business, they also have business discounts. So it's a very reliable source. And this is what we're doing here. And this update, monthly updates for UCLA and UCI. We want to make sure you have the resources. And National Safety Council is one of those that you want to have. The actual National Safety Council course for fire prevention runs about $29 for a 48-minute course. So for your managers and the people in charge of doing your safety inspections that go around the facility, taking a look at your exit routes, fire extinguisher, and any of your established fire alarms, you want them to have some sort of training, some sort of good background. And we're going to talk about some other good tips in order for you to be compliant with your fire prevention program. So let me take you here. This is important for all of us to see. This is what's happening in real life and some of the things that we've been seeing in our nation. If I can't share, you guys let me know. Some of you know that I am very fond of the Chemical Safety Board videos. I think that they do a great job making sure that we know how to take care of our workers.
Everything was changed that morning. And when Cody and I got to the hospital, the first thing the doctors told us walking in the door was he was burned 95% of his body, and we don't think he's gonna make it. There's nothing you can say to that.
January 31st, 2011. Two maintenance workers were troubleshooting a problem with a bucket elevator at the Haganese Powdered Metals plant in Gallatin, Tennessee. Suddenly, fine particles of iron dust ignited when workers attempted to restart the elevator's motor. The CSB investigation into that accident was underway when just 2 months later, on March 29th, a similar flash fire burned another Haganese worker. At a news conference in Tennessee on May 11th, the CSB released laboratory test results demonstrating the combustibility of even small amounts of the iron dust when dispersed in air in the presence of an ignition source. Just 16 days after the CSB released those test results, on May 27th, a hydrogen explosion erupted in the plant. The blast shook loose iron dust accumulations from the upper reaches of the building, which ignited and rained down on workers.
Combustible dust is a serious workplace hazard across the country. Since the Chemical Safety Board was established in 1998, 3 of the deadliest accidents we have investigated have been combustible dust explosions. They are entirely preventable, just like the dust fires that occurred at Haganese.
The Haganese Corporation is a subsidiary of GKN, a multinational engineering company headquartered in the United Kingdom.
We're not going to watch the entire video. I wanted to make sure that you guys have an idea of some of the issues going on. I want you to chat with me right now and tell me a little bit of what you got right there with the flash fires that occurred and what called your attention. You can chat with me and put things such as 2 months after one fire had already taken place, another one takes place. What did you see also in the video when the forklift was taking, lifting that door or that opening in the floor? What did you notice? Static electricity. What is that? Right? So start chatting with me and tell me what are the things that went wrong. What were the things that went wrong? And we have. And as we go along with these things, we also take a look at videos that the Chemical Safety Board has put together and reanimated. And I really appreciate the fact that we can use these videos to train our people, especially if there's a video that you can find that is similar to the type of industry you're in, take it, play the video, train your people, tell them importance of controlling ignition sources, for example. This is all about fire and fire prevention, remember.
In 1979, 20-year-old John Capana was a contract worker performing maintenance at a New Jersey refinery.
We actually had pulled out of the refinery and were called back in to do one last job, which was to demolish an old pumping station. We were told that it was a water pumping station. It was not a water line. It was a crude oil line, in fact. We tried to dismantle the pump, starting with removing the bolts from the flanges, and they were so corroded that we couldn't get them loose by conventional means, so we elected to use an acetylene torch at that point. As soon as the flange separated, it exploded. It was burned over 90% of my body.
30 years and over 75 surgeries later, Mr. Capana now assists other burn survivors as they recover from their wounds, often suffered on the job.
Don't think that something this tragic couldn't happen to you or somebody you love. This could happen to anybody.
John Capana's life was changed forever by a hot work accident. Welding, cutting,
Sorry, Alba, I don't
seemingly a
see the YouTube.
operator.
I'm glad you said something.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said that a little sooner.
Yeah, no, all of us, can you see right now the page?
I see the image, yeah. I think,
So
okay.
This is how the man, Mr. Capana, looks like. 90% of his body was burned. He was cutting and replacing, I think, one part of the pipe. And what he's talking about is he was told that the pipe carried water. It was a water duct, but in fact, it was crude oil. And because crude oil is a combustible, when we're talking about the properties of different substances, you need to take a look at whether or not it's a flammable or a combustible liquid. And if you're going to do any hot work, which is cutting, welding, or using any type of acetylene torch, etc., anything that produces sparks, that's called hot work. You need to conduct a hot permit or assessment sheet, right? And the actual hot work permit allows employers to assess everything around the area and the actual activity itself, and any and all of the hazards posed by that activity. And then when all of that is checked and remediated, then you can go ahead and start the hot work. But this is another of those Chemical Safety Board videos that are very important, analyzing some of these issues with fires at work. So welding, cutting, and anything that is related to hot work. And the previous one that I showed you has to do with combustible dust. Combustible dust is actually an emphasis program right now for OSHA. And this is a safety update webinar series. So remember, that one has stayed for a while. Combustible dust has been an emphasis program for years now, and is first on the line when you Google emphasis programs, national emphasis programs by federal OSHA, combustible dust, because dust at work in plants that produce sugar, flour, even this metal plant, right, is very fine dust that, given an ignition source and all of the right conditions, even the confinements, etc., of the actual plant, will produce very powerful explosions, and people are at great risk of dying and being trapped. So because they're very quick, they're massive, and it's just something that you need to assess. And that's why I love the chat, because that all of a sudden I see you all responding and talking. It seems like no one did the due diligence in training on what to do after the first time an incident occurred. Incident investigation gives you such wonderful information as to what you need to do better, because there was 2 months between the first incident, the first flash fire, and the second one, and it was just static electricity. That spark produced when the forklift lifted and produced that spark with the chains as they open that compartment. And with all of the surrounding combustible dust, the fire became explosive. And like I said, if you watch that video, they're going to talk about many of the different conditions that must be present for explosions of this type to occur. But yes, absolutely. When we have a fire prevention program in place, we are forced to assess any and all known hazards depending on what we're doing, our type of industry, plant, manufacturing area, or whatever we're doing at that point. We are forced to do due diligence and do a hazard assessment, which is the actual observation of in the next line here in our chat. Maybe job hazard safety analysis wasn't performed. It's actually the conducting a fire analysis, a fire hazard analysis that is mandated by your fire prevention program that wasn't performed. I love this. There didn't seem to be a safety stand down after the first incident to evaluate the potential for others. That's correct. So a lot of you do this safety stand downs where you get together and say, this is what happened. We don't want this to ever happen again. These are the things that we have to do to prevent it, right? And so that is super important, especially with things of this nature. If you haven't finished your investigation, if you're not sure of all, because 2 months and, it should have been enough time, but sometimes we get caught up and we don't know exactly how things happen. We are still pending with our investigation. We don't give it priority and information is missing. So at least we should stop doing certain types of activities while we get all the information we need to prevent incidents like this from happening again. So don't forget to take a look at this video room from the Chemical Safety Board, because you learn a lot. You learn a lot. And I especially want you to take a look at the hot work, dangers of hot work video if you do welding at any of your facilities, or if you hire people to do welding at any of your facilities, or if you are modifying or under construction of your facilities and you are hiring outside vendors or contractors that bring in, torches, or they are going to do cutting, weldings, soldering, etc. All of that brings the issue of permits before they do hot work. Okay, very good. Let's get back. So that's just to give you an idea as to what we're looking at when we look at fire prevention. More real life stories. We have here fire officials inspected in the store. You have different Dollar Tree stores nationwide. And, anytime you have OSHA citations and violations is public record. So it's not like, ooh, she's showing this and, the reputation of the business. It's public record. And that's what happens when you start ignoring these regulations and you don't comply with them. Now your name is in the OSHA website. Fire officials inspected the store 11 times in 2021 and ordered the facility closed 6 times due to hazardous conditions, according to OSHA. And it was a particular store, okay? Willful violations cited by the agency included blocking emergency routes, exits, and fire extinguishers, and failing to leave adequate space around electrical panels. These things are so common. I see them all the time. I mean, when I get hired by you guys, and I appreciate that you call me and say, hey, let's just do a walkthrough together. I see these things so often. So it's not just an issue of Dollar Tree. I want to ask you right now in your organization, if you are to walk outside of your office or walk your warehouse or walk towards the shipping, loading and unloading, or any area of your facility, can you find boxes of material in front of your electrical panels where there are lines on the floor that are not being observed, not respected? So your electrical panels are always obstructed. Your workplace doesn't look tidy. There are no actual inspections or walkthroughs that occur to actually keep these things in order. So ask yourself those questions and take them as a real example. And, all over the nation, these things are happening. Fires and people that die as a result of fire. We have very good regulations that need to be observed. And we started these regulations starting, I think it was 1911 in New York with the waist shirt factory fire, which a lot of young women died, jumped to their deaths because they got trapped because the exits to the building when the fire occurred were blocked. And they were blocked because the company was afraid of all the stealing that was going on. Some of the employees were stealing fabric and some of the the nice fabrics and things for fashion at the time. And they blocked them, and they had like a strict way of coming in and going out of the building. So This is something that occurs still in many other countries. 38 workers died. This is November 2022. In China, at least 38 people were killed on Monday after a fire swept through a two-story factory in central Henan province that housed chemicals and other industrial goods. So I invite you to think, what do we have in our organization? Do we have paints, acetone, gasoline, diesel? Because a lot of these things are things that fueled your machines. If you're a landscape company, you have diesel, you have gasoline, you have a lot of, maybe you have pesticides, you have permits to actually use and utilize pesticides, or maybe you do have big gallons or drums of solvents, because in your plant or manufacturing you use solvents to actually clean parts. So these things are very common. So don't think that, oh well, that's in China. Well, you house chemicals, you have chemicals, and are we looking into the appropriate way to store them? Are we looking into ways of controlling sources of ignition, etc.? Let's enable closed captioning. Okay. Thank you, Lindsay. Most common causes of workplace fires. So what is it that is causing these fires? Because statistically, we just saw that a lot of people, an average of 5,000 people get injured on the job because of fires at work. Well, I see a lot of this, and these are real pictures of places of employment that I've been to. Defective electrical equipment, and I should have put, I have a myriad of pictures in regards to defective electrical equipment. I see a lot of misused, overloaded outlets, misused equipment, like what? When you grab an extension cord and you daisy chain it, for example. And then what happens is you start getting those cords overheated, and maybe you want to hide them under a rug. So recipe for disaster, right? And then a fire starts, and you wonder why. Improperly maintained equipment. I've seen a lot of power tools where employees carry them by the cord, and the insulation starts breaking down, and then you have issues of fires whenever the equipment is being used. Flammable and combustible materials. We have a lot of issues with chemicals in combustible materials, right? Accumulation of boxes, wood, cloth, furniture, etc. Trash, all of the things that will make a fire even greater, right? To take really on with fury. We have flammable and combustible liquids that need to be stored properly in your facility. And you have to have something in writing. You have to keep it, and you have to do it, not just have it in writing and not do it. You have to control ignition sources. And we're talking about where can a spark can be produced, just like you saw in the video. The man was driving the forklift and lifting those chains to open a compartment on the ground. And what happened? The sparks from the movement of the forks and the friction between the forks and the metal of the chains produced that spark that ignited the dust around that area, which combined with the subsequent explosions rattled the building, and a lot of the accumulation of dust from the top of the beams and in all of the corners of the building that hadn't been properly maintained, kept up, cleaned. All of the housekeeping rules, they're there for a reason. Control of ignition sources. How are we going to control these ignition sources? And you start looking into specialized equipment so that there are non-spark electrical outlets and fixtures and tools that do not produce sparks, which, by the way, is not 100% bulletproof. So you really need to be sure of what you're using in which areas, post signs, make employees aware, etc. Faulty detection alarms and alarm systems. So many times you come into a building that you're renting or leasing, and you have equipment or detection alarms and alarm systems, pull stations or sprinkler systems that are not properly maintained. And you must do due diligence for those things to be kept up, and you have to have records of the maintenance, because for your pull station alarms, a lot of the recommendations are for every 6 months having an actual visual inspection, and for you to actually do that test of your alarm at least once a year. And then there's all of those sprinklers and some of the regulations that are also brought by not just fire departments, but OSHA, which talk about at least 18 inches of space between the sprinklers heads and the actual storage of materials. Fault detection, cooking appliances in break rooms. This is very, very common when you have, overloaded outlets and you have a lot of those power strips connected and overloaded with microwaves, toaster ovens, coffee makers, stoves, you name it. And it's all in one outlet that gets overheated, starts the fire. You also have the issue of untidy and dirty workplaces, which I see all the time. There's no way to navigate your wood shops, your machine shop. There's no way to safely navigate the area where you do assembly or where there is robotic arms, because all of the parts are being brought next to that station. Pallets and machinery equipment are kind of crowding that area and putting that worker into a position where he cannot escape if a fire was to break out. So untidy and dirty workplace and all of those housekeeping measures that are there for you to actually be able to have a path to get you to the exit route, to get you to the actual exit to the outdoors, the assembly point, etc. Heating equipment, improperly installed, operated, or maintained furnaces and heaters, and the use of heaters during now the actual colder months of the year, where people bring their own heater, put it under their desk, then leave it unattended, and their desk obviously is full of paper, boxes from deliveries, etc. So you have all these combustible materials, plus the actual issue of leaving a heater that is not a compliant heater that can tip over and ignite all those combustible materials. One of the easiest solutions for that is just to prohibit the use of heaters at the workplace. You do have an actual temperature control for offices, etc. So you shouldn't allow the use of heaters during the colder months of the year. Quick, a fire. When there's a fire, the last thing you want to say is, where is my fire extinguisher? And then once you see it or find it under all the rubbish, trash, etc., and how do I use this thing, right? So that would be bad news. You wouldn't want to be in this situation. We make several mistakes, and the first one is that we may only have an emergency action plan. The emergency action plan has requirements. We've done, for those of you that have followed us through this monthly series of safety updates, last year we did do the emergency action plan. So it is important to highlight that the emergency action plan, although fire is one of the emergencies considered within your emergency action plan, does not require, so the requirements under the emergency action plan will not specify all of the requirements for your fire prevention plan. So that's one of the most common mistakes that I find, that you try and put everything under your emergency action plan and you forget that you have an actual requirement to have a fire prevention program. The second most common mistake is that there has never been a fire assessment for the organization. So right there, just like you chatted with me, you said, it seems like nobody assessed the workplace. Only you know what you're doing at your place of employment. Do you have spray booths, painting spray booths? Well, when you're spraying paint, that's a flammable liquid. What are the actual, assessment, the assessment that you've made? What are the actual requirements for spray booths? And are you compliant? Because there's a myriad of requirements, for example, for spray booths to prevent the issue of fire. And not just that, but also the functioning of the actual booth and the prevention of having those chemicals, because we have the issue of isocyanates, etc., being coming into the lungs or the breathing through breathing of the worker, right? So we get other issues with respiratory protection, etc. But for the fire prevention program, even looking into those spray booths being compliant and having a checklist to make sure that they are compliant is super important. So if you never walk the walk, you never talk the talk, I'm huge in regards to doing walkthroughs, you will never know what you're missing and what you're not compliant. One of the greatest assets and one of the greatest things that you can do, and you can make a note here, is that you can call your fire department, and they're awesome. Some of them will do it for free. It just depends. Each local fire department has their own policies. Some will charge a fee, which is totally fine. It's so worth it. It's probably going to be $100, $150, if anything. But they come and they tell you what are the issues that are out of compliance clients what you need to do and what are the issues you need to fix immediately. And then they'll help you. They'll help you to see what are the areas of your facility. And of course, before a fire marshal inspection, you do want to prepare yourself because you don't want any of the issues of red tape, right? You don't want them to come and say, well, we're going to shut down this area because the issue the danger here is huge. And if there is an issue such as that, why wouldn't you want to know? So that's why I'm big on inviting the fire department. Some of your organizations have this fire marshal inspection mandated by law in your city because of the type of occupancy, et cetera, or type of building. Schools have to have a fire inspection by the fire marshal of your local fire department once a year, for example. Jails have to have it twice a year. Not twice a year, I'm sorry. I said it wrong. Every 2 years, that's what I meant to say. So invite them over, have them give you their 2 cents, walk with them, take pictures, make a list of the things that you need to fix, ask them where to get resources and information, and ask them how to do things better and how to get your drills every year, and how to, if they think that your evacuation routes are appropriate, and if they think that your assembly areas are good, ask them more than what they're there to inspect, because many times they'll focus on a list of things that I'm going to show you. I have a link for that. They'll focus on some specific issues that they usually do, which include, for example, that your alarm systems are working, sprinklers, manual pull stations, routes, exit routes during an evacuation, lit up signs, which you should be testing anyways. Monthly, there are some requirements for those lit up signs to actually be tested. And there's a little button there that you can click in and find out whether or not you need to switch the battery or what's going on. They're going to focus on some of those issues. They will also look at electrical safety, because as you noticed in my previous slide, I did note that one as number one, because we have so many electrical issues at our facilities. If you have an actual inspector from OSHA, they always find electrical issues, which can cause a fire. That's their main concern, which because electrical issues and electrical safety issues will almost always lead to the risk of fire. There's other issues such as lockout, tagout, etc., but the risk of fire is huge. So they will focus also on that. Your fire marshal will tell you, you can't do this, don't daisy chain this, you can't put this cable through the ceiling and under a door, or you cannot have these many devices or appliances connected to this outlet, and you cannot put this extra device to make your outlet able to connect 10 different devices. So they'll give you the big no-nos, and they'll write it down, and you can change those things right away when they're there. But just do it, right? Why wait? Don't make this list long. Just make sure that you fix it right there and then. So make sure that you have your periodic inspections and schedule them. Make sure that you keep records of these inspections. And then if you don't do these things, your fire plan is really not effective. That's another one of our mistakes, which means we pay someone to put together, and this is an important one, this last one of the last common mistake your organization may be making at this point is that you hired someone or you paid a consultant like me to put together your written safety programs. And we do. I mean, we're happy to do it. But the thing is, we are focused on making sure those plans, those written programs are compliant with the regulation. But if you, the employer, your supervisors, your employees are not making it effective, meaning they don't put it in practice, that's the word. It's not put in practice because they never read it. So it never gets to them. Supervisors never get to read it. Supervisors never get to be assigned with the tasks that they need to be assigned. Employees never get training. They don't even know what their extinguishers are. They don't even know how to use them, right? And you need to know these things. Where do you find the requirements? In Section 3221 of Title 8 of the California Code of Regulations. And it applies to all fire prevention plans. The fire prevention has elements, and you must have them in writing. So I'm going to show you a sample plan that I have. Most of us consultants have templates. We've put together templates to help our clients, and we update them according to regulation. But it is important that you actually marry that with the practices at your facility. In practical terms, what are the most important requirements? Number one, having a plan, a written plan that is effective, right? The second thing is training employees, because if you don't train them and you don't tell them what that plan is all about and how they're going to make it effective and how to protect themselves, we're doing it all wrong. People are going to get trapped. People are going to get hurt during that fire. and to have those inspections. Super, super important. Those are critical. The first very, very important tip of the day, what you must do. Number one, I said, call your local fire department. If you haven't, I know some of you already have an annual fire inspection, and it's very helpful, but many times you just kind of stay quiet. You don't ask questions. Ask them, how is this assembly point a good one when we evacuate? Get those questions out that have to do with emergency preparedness and that have to do with your actual alarm system. So once they're done with your inspection, have a list of questions that you have for them based on what you've learned today. Prepare for fire marshal inspection before they get to you. So that's ideal, because that way you can actually start fixing some issues that you already know are going to be out of compliance, and use their knowledge to your advantage, right? So I have a link here. This is a great link of a vendor, of course. And the fact that I put vendors doesn't mean either UCLA, UCI, or the Southern California Research and Education Center is endorsing any of these sites. It's just when I do my research, I find some sites that do have great info for you guys, and it's important to use them. So when they get to you, after reviewing the fire codes and requirements for your business jurisdiction, like I said, because it all varies according to the type of business you have, the occupancy, and they're going to get to you, you'll want to complete a brief inspection of things your fire inspector will look. So these are some of the things that they focus on, okay? Access and premises. So your actual building. Is your address visible from the street? Are the exterior entrances clear? Are your fire hydrants accessible, visible? Means of egress, exit doors visible, accessible, functional, not blocked. Huge issue. If they see an exit that is blocked, that is one of the issues that they're going to focus on. Make sure that they open easily from the inside without a key or any special instructions, because during an emergency, everybody would just cram against that door and nobody's opening that door and you're trapped. All required fire doors should be self-closing. Then they're going to look at electrical circuits labeled uncontrolled. That's huge. Most of the time, guys, when I go take a look at your facilities, I open those electrical panels, the ones that you have those emergency shutdowns or your circuit breakers. They're unlabeled, so we don't know what goes to what. And during an emergency, you don't know what to shut down, right? So electrical panels need to be labeled. At least 30 inches of clear space in front of them for better access. And of course, it will depend on the voltage. All extension cords must be in good condition, used for small devices and grounded. Many times people that can't connect something to an older outlet will clip that ground prong. It's a very common unsafe practice. Extension cords, they will look at every single extension cord that is visible to them. Cover plates, oh my goodness, do I look at a lot of missing cover plates at your places of employment? Yes, this is a fire issue. It's an exposure to live parts as well. So is there also the risk of shock and electrocution? Please take a look at that. Egress lighting, exit routes properly illuminated while the building is occupied. Double check to make sure emergency lighting units are operable. Sufficient. Then you can take a look at more of the fire extinguishers. Oh my goodness. I find a lot of our businesses have fire extinguishers that are not readily available. They're obstructed. You use that area to put all of the deliveries or to station whatever you're going to station there. And then all of a sudden that sign that says fire extinguisher is pointing down, you can't see the fire extinguisher because it's blocked. So access to fire extinguishers, unobstructed, same as with any other type of emergency equipment, such as emergency showers, eye wash stations, etc. Extinguishers should have been inspected within the last 12 months and tagged by an approved agency. So in your plan, your sample plan, you're going to see that that's where you put the company that is doing that annual inspection. But OSHA also mandates a monthly visual that your supervisor in your area department should be doing. It's a quick inspection and you just put it on the tag. Fire alarm and sprinkler systems, make sure that you have documentation that you do have that annual fire alarm test. Check the height of storage below fire. I said 18 inches, remember? Similar to alarms, fire sprinkler system needs to be checked annually, etc. Appliances and devices, they're going to check that you have 36 inches of clear space on all sides of each heater. Gas fire heat producing appliances need properly installed and maintained vents, buildings, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. So this is a good link for you guys to review later. but those are some of the issues that they will focus on, and you need to be prepared if you will have an actual annual or biannual inspection. So what should it look like? You put your logo, you put, this is my fire prevention plan, and this is what I'm going to focus on, okay? So first, let me show you what you need to have. And for that, I'm going to do Cal OSHA 3221, we said, right? Fire prevention plan, and that's what the requirements are going to be in. The elements of the actual written program need to have a list of the potential fire hazards. So how are you going to know what are the potential fire hazards in your facility? For example, for that manufacturing where the issue of iron dust or metal dust was an issue, by doing a walkthrough and actually assessment of the hazards, they would have found out we have combustible dust all around our facility. And this is how we're going to do ignition control, right? So it says potential fire hazards, proper handling, storage, potential ignition sources such as welding, smoking, and others, anything. Static electricity is a source of ignition, and their control. So now you're actually going to make a list of the fire hazards. You're going to find that you have issues with storage, issues with ignition sources. And now after you make that list, you're going to do, what are the controls I'm going to implement and put in place? Just a quick example. Non-smoking signs, that's a control procedure, right? But there's so much more. For example, when it has to do with welding, my best advice is that you actually prepare a checklist, right? And you do have hot work permits, because that's the control procedure for welding and all hot work. So see, it's a small 2-line requirement that brings in a lot of issues depending on what you're doing in your facility. Then you're going to have required in this written program names or regular job titles of those responsible for, and it says regular job titles because if you just invent some job title that doesn't exist, then you wouldn't have anybody in charge of doing this, because you want names of those responsible for maintenance of equipment and systems installed to prevent, control ignitions or fires. So for your pool station, for your sprinklers, for anything that you have in your facility, you want to, or deluge systems, you want to have the name of the company that comes and maintains them, their phone number, and you want to have that job title at your facility of the person that is in charge of making sure that the maintenance happens, right? Names and job titles of those responsible for the control of accumulation of flammable and combustible waste materials. This is so important because as I walk through your facilities, I find a lot of those safety cans, the waste baskets for oily or solvent-soaked rags, I find them overflowing. And people don't seem to think that that's an issue, but safety cans are called safety cans for an issue, for a purpose, right? Because they will contain those rags with solvent, let's say acetone, for example, and will keep those flammable vapors. Because remember that the acetone, being a liquid, releases a vapor. And that vapor, in combination with air and an ignition source, when the right conditions, because you have a lower explosive limit and an upper explosive limit, but in the right conditions, the right concentration, that's what it means, right concentration in air, with air, the air in our atmosphere, and the ignition source will go kaboom, right? So this is why this is so important. It's asking us to have someone responsible to know, okay, how do we accumulate this flammable or combustible waste material? So we have all of these rags because we clean these parts. Where are we going to put them? Oh, we're going to buy this safety can. Guess what? They're overflowing. We need to buy more, or these are broken. They don't close. The actual mechanism for the lid would allow for those vapors to be contained and not form that mixture that could be explosive in the area of work where you clean parts, for example. So this is why it's so important. Housekeeping as the next element in your plan. The employer shall control accumulations of flammable and combustible waste materials and residues so that they do not contribute to a fire emergency, and you need to put it in writing. And then training. And training, there's every time you have requirements for a specific regulation, you do have a portion of that regulation for training of employees. And many times that training is divided in two. Training for supervisors and training for employees. And you have to do both, and you have to document both. In this case, training for the employee has to be in regards to, these are the hazards you may be exposed to. because you work near the spray booth, and the paint that is being sprayed produces all of this mists, and you may be exposed to fire. This is where the fire extinguisher is. Fire extinguishers are only to be used by authorized personnel. Authorized personnel, what does that mean? People that have received training in the last 12 months. If you haven't received training to use a fire extinguisher, preferably hands-on, you should not touch them. You should evacuate. So those are some of the things that are super important with fire prevention and our plan. There are some, the OSHA publication for fire protection and prevention is a really good one. It kind of goes into a lot of the issues, safe work practices. So I love it. And it gives you a template on putting your actual plan in writing. So I like that source. I will send it with the list of the links that we have for this class. Training, like we said, the first thing to do, and that's why I put it in bold, is to designate a responsible person, someone that knows what they're talking about, that will train other people, supervisors most of the time, or team leaders that will talk to employees in their area. So your wood shop lead person will actually get this training requirement and go over where the fire extinguisher is, who is the one in charge of using it, how to exit the building, when is the fire considered incipient stages of the fire, what are the chemicals or combustible materials around your area, how to keep those ignition sources under control. So you're basically going on and on about the requirements of the fire prevention during training. So the fire prevention program will allow that trainer to do their job. And they're gonna, because the requirements are to tell employees what are the fire hazards in their area, what are the materials, because you could be having hazardous materials in your facility that they're not even aware of, and they work next door to it, or in an area where some of this hazardous materials, flammable liquids, combustible liquids are stored, and they didn't even know it. So you have to talk to them about this. Review with each employee upon initial assignment. So basically, when they come into your facility, you have this new work orientation, and you spend, some of you spend hours, some of you spend days, some of you spend a full week training people on all of the aspects of coming onto your facility to work for you. And safety is a huge part of that new work orientation program. So the first week they spend it just going over everything that has to do with safety. And one of those is reviewing that portion of the fire prevention plan that is all about them. So if they are not designated to use a fire extinguisher, then the key thing is to tell them you are to evacuate. And this is what the alarm sounds like. We do a drill every year, etc. The written plan must be available for review, so you have to tell them where it is at, and you are allowed to orally communicate these issues when you have less than 10 employees, but I do not recommend this, because when you talk about communicating orally with employees, you know, I don't know, if it's not in writing, it never happened. We all have very bad memories. So, and last but not least, maintenance. The employer shall regularly and properly maintain according to established procedures, equipment and systems installed. So it's interesting because these bullet points are included in the requirements for training. That means you have to discuss with employees how you do each of these things. And you can take my slides and review them after today's class and make sure that you do appropriate training. If you are going to tell some of the employees, for example, some of the safety issues for Cal OSHA, like hot work, you're required to have a fire watch. So for welding, for 30 minutes after welding took place, someone has to be watching for smoldering fires or anything that may start, and you have to have a fire extinguisher. So that person who's designated as a fire watch must have training on how to use an extinguisher. And when we talk about fire and the use of extinguishers, it's not just the pass technique, okay? The hands-on pass technique is more than that. It's talking about the different types of fires. It's talking about the different types of extinguishers. It's talking about how to actually do this thing, this pass technique, because, you know, it's easy to say, pull the pin, aim at the base, squeeze trigger, and sweep. But how far from the fire? Those things are important, you know. Start a little bit farther away from the fire and get closer, because those things kick a little, you know, and you got to get a handle of making sure that it really is aiming at the base, and you're not going to make the fire worse by being too close and then spreading the flames. Things like that really do happen. Actually, just pulling the pin. Sometimes you are so stressed because of the little fire that started, you can't pull the pin. Is because you can't break the plastic seal. So it does take a little bit of the twisting of the actual pin to get that plastic tie to be broken. And more on those key resources that I want you to see, guys. There are enormous amounts of information provided by the actual OSHA website. And this one's one. And the reason why I give you the link is because if you just put fire prevention, you know, the list is very big. And the one that I want you to look at is the fire safety by OSHA. This is where you get awesome information as to where is the law, what are the hazards and possible solutions. So I love this portion of the e-tools by the OSHA.gov. Remember, many times you're thinking, but OSHA.gov is all federal, doesn't apply to me. In reality, don't forget that our program in California and the regulation I showed you right here, 3221, derives originally from what? OSHA.gov, federal, the feds. They're the ones that put together all these regs, and we went from there. So basically copied everything, and we kind of changed it around for our applications, right? In our state, we have permission from federal government to have a state approved program. But I love federal e-tools because they do give you an idea on how to do training, what are the hazards, the possible solutions, etc. So they have a great small business safety and health handbook. And this handbook that you see is good for you guys that are starting to put together your fire prevention program, because you will find workplace self-inspection checklist, even just for compressed gas cylinders. You need a checklist, you got it right there. Cylinders are clearly marked to identify their contents. Yes or no? If it's a no, what are you going to do? Order those labels. You're going to make sure that every single cylinder is marked and you're able to identify the contents. Cylinders are stored where they cannot be damaged. They cannot fall and become a projectile, right? Cylinders are regularly examined for obvious signs of defects, deep rusting, leakage, right? Because there was a Praxair huge fire that broke out because of faulty valves that started letting the gas out into the environment. And it was semi-outdoors. Very important to do this. Care is issued in handling and storage of cylinders, safety valves, etc. So if you want a checklist, you got it. The other very, very good electrical safety checklist. So a lot of good checklists. Electrical work performed by workers or contractors complies with OSHA standards. How do you know? Ooh, I don't know. Well, one of the comments is, if I don't know how to make it that it is OSHA standard. First, anybody that you contract to do work at your facility should provide you with a list of, this is what we do, and our work is OSHA compliant, right? Not OSHA approved. OSHA is not going to approve anybody's work or anybody's products, but you can also see whether or not these people have made their due diligence to do their work by training their employees according to safety standards. Sufficient access and working space is provided and maintained around all electrical, and we talked about that when you have those big panels or electrical equipment for machinery and equipment, and it's all blocked and no one can access it. Workers make preliminary inspections and perform appropriate tests to determine conditions before starting work on electrical equipment or lines. So you have a lot of issues with arc flash or flash fires, etc. You need to know whether or not you're doing that checklist for the work you're going to be performing electrical equipment. In wet or damp locations, electrical tools and equipment are appropriate for the use of a location or otherwise protected. I don't know what that's all about. We'll find out. What does it mean doubly insulated? What does it mean power tools or tools that are able to be used in wet or damp locations, right? Metal measuring tapes, ropes, hand lines, and similar devices with metallic thread woven into the fabric are not used where they could come in contact with energized parts of equipment or circuit conductors. So as you can see, these are great checklists in this tool provided by OSHA. There's more here on different links, hazards, possible solutions. So the standards and additional resources, you will find a myriad of great information. And the last tool that I had was that of the General Emergency Action Plan. And that would be Evacuation Plan and Procedures e-tool by OSHA.gov. Let me know if you have any more questions. That's what I have for you for the day. This is a great topic where we need to actually improve our practices and really make sure that, I know what I didn't show you, the actual plan. I'll show it real quick so you all can start your weekend with the right foot. So this is a Word document. It's a sample fire prevention plan. just to give you an idea of what it should look like. Like I said, it has to be separate from your emergency action plan. The fire prevention plan should have your policy at the beginning. I always mention the authority, which is 3221, and then I go into fire hazard assessment, right? Which takes into account you walking the walk, going through your facility, and making sure that you take a look at what are the issues of fire hazards. So fire prevention, assignment of responsibility, you want to make sure that you put right there, and I highlighted it in yellow, put a name, put a job title, who's in charge of this fire prevention, right? And what are his or her responsibilities? Put to when you wrote this program and the revision, because you got to revise these things. You got to take a look at whether or not they're functional and they're meaning something. Then you're going to put a list of your departments at your facility and the job titles and the supervisors, and what are they doing? Are they really going to help you with implementing this plan? And you start, for example, general housekeeping, and you add or change anything that applies. And wait a minute, I did an actual sample prevention program not too long ago, which, let me see if this one is the one, in which I went ahead and I updated some of the issues because I wanted to do this class and provide you with a better, yeah, right here. So you always have, make sure, if you notice, the regulation 3221 does not require you to write your program in a certain way, but it does give you a list of elements. And one of the things that will make your programs effective, meaning that will translate into practice, is having someone responsible. So you put there who's going to be responsible for the whole plan, and then you put supervisors responsible for the control of accumulation of flammable, combustible materials, waste materials, etc. And put the names or job titles, and put your departments, your office areas, your metal department, assembly department, wood department, shipping, loading, unloading. Put there who's in charge of that area, because then they will own it and they will keep an eye out on waste accumulation, flammable and combustible materials, your flammable cabinets, that they're appropriately used and they're not some sort of storage closet, right? Equipment that you have in that area, portable extinguishers, fire sprinkler system, and what are the vendors, who maintains those? And then you get into identifying your hazards by work area. Your office and entrance, you will have paper, electrical issues. So what are the fire hazards by each of your departments? And what are the fire prevention practices? You start with housekeeping practices, waste paper cans emptied daily. So now it starts becoming practical. You start telling supervisors, those waste cans, just the trash gets emptied daily. And those safety cans, the red ones that get full of solvent-soaked rags, those need to be emptied also by the end of your shift. And this is where it becomes something practical. And then you have issues such as, for example, how are you going to prevent ignition sources while cutting, welding, and open flame work? And so basically what I put here is a checklist, and it becomes a little bit of a work permit. Once you go through this checklist, cutting and welding done by authorized personnel, check. That means someone that is knowledgeable. Adequate ventilation is provided. Yeah, we're going to do it outdoors. Check, right? And so once you check, you can start the work, because you make sure there are no flammable atmospheres around the area where you're going to start producing sparks. That's why it's called hot work. More on how do you do inventory for chemicals. You shouldn't allow people to buy stuff at your facility and just bring it in and use it. You should have a system so that you always update your inventory of chemicals. You have safety data sheets and you know how to store them. For example, you have to have flammable combustible liquids in certain quantities, and how do you separate them? Where is your storage room? Where is your fire extinguisher? So this is a fire prevention plan that it is actually going to work for you, because you're saying practical solutions to what you have, fire control measures for what you have for your building, for each of your areas, work areas. You're going to make a list. You're going to put the type and size of whatever fire control measure you have in place and the location. So that's what I have for you guys. I do have questions or chat. Okay, guys, thanks again. I know it's 2:02 and you've been super patient. and you go through all of these things with me to keep everybody safe at work. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you in a month. I know we have more classes coming up, and the first one of the year is Injury and Illness Prevention Program. Be with us, talk to Lindsay about when those classes are, and sign up. And don't forget to designate people to watch these classes every first Friday of the month. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you